They called it junk, just a rusted train car rotting behind weeds at a forgotten countryside auction. But when a struggling mother raised her trembling hand and whispered a $200 bid, the world shifted. No one clapped, no one cared, yet inside that decaying shell, behind layers of dust and silence, slept a secret worth more than any fortune the living had ever known. What she bought that day wasn't scrap metal, it was history's buried heartbeat. And by the time she unlocked it, her name would echo across headlines and graves. After the echo of the auction, ears gavel faded, the world seemed to pause, just long enough for Elena Martin to wonder if she'd lost her mind. The laughter still rippled through the crowd, the kind that bites through pride and leaves a bruise that lingers. 200 for that junk pile. Someone sneered from behind, but Elena didn't look back. Her eyes stayed on the rusted train car half, hidden by tall weeds, its metal skin eaten by years of rain and neglect. She didn't know why she'd bid. Maybe it was defiance, maybe desperation, or maybe, deep down, she just wanted to believe that forgotten things could still hold value. The afternoon sun was sharp and merciless. The dry wind carried the scent of iron and dust, wrapping around her like a reminder of how far she'd fallen. Once, she'd dreamed of galleries and studios, her paintings hanging beneath soft light and quiet admiration. Now, her hands were cracked from cleaning houses, and her dreams lived in the corners of unpaid bills. The auction had been her gamble, a chance to find something, anything, she could fix and sell. That was all it was supposed to be. But when she looked at that train car, its peeling paint, its faded insignia of an age long gone, something inside her stirred. There was elegance in its decay, a strange dignity clinging to its bones. It wasn't just metal, it was memory. She stepped closer after the crowd began to disperse, her boots sinking into the damp earth. Up close, the car loomed like a relic from another world. Its windows were fogged with grime, but behind them, she thought she saw the faint outline of velvet seats, now ghostly and torn. A fragment of a gold hinge caught the sun, a whisper of its former life. The auctioneer ambled over, wiping sweat from his neck with a crumpled rag. "You sure you want this one, ma'am? We can't guarantee it won't fall apart before you even get it home." Elena forced a thin smile. "I'll take my chances." He shrugged. "Well, it's yours. I'll have the boys move it by morning." As he walked away, Elena stood still, the weight of her decision pressing against her chest. The sound of the departing trucks faded until only the wind remained. For a long moment, she just watched the car, its rusted frame gleaming faintly under the sinking sun. Something about it felt alive, like it was waiting for her. The drive back to town was long and silent. The road cut through fields of dying grass, the world painted in tones of amber and rust. Her old pickup rattled with every bump, its engine coughing in protest. In the passenger seat lay her daughter's school photo, a smile that looked too bright for the life they lived. "Maybe this time," she whispered to herself, glancing at the photo. "Maybe this time it'll change something." The next morning, the transport truck arrived, the men grumbling as they chained the derelict car to the flatbed. The clang of metal echoed through the quiet street, drawing the attention of curious neighbors. Mrs. Lang from across the way leaned over her fence, clutching her coffee mug like it was a front-row ticket. "What on earth is that thing?" she called out. Elena wiped sweat from her brow. "An old train car." Mrs. Lang snorted. "Looks like it should have stayed in the junkyard." The men laughed, and Elena forced herself not to react. She'd learned long ago that silence hurt less than argument. Still, as the truck rolled away with its strange cargo, she couldn't shake the flicker of pride beneath the embarrassment. That car was hers now. Whatever it was, whatever it became, It belonged to her. By afternoon, the train car was set down on the small plot of land behind her rented house. The lot had once been a vegetable garden. Now, it was just dirt and overgrown weeds. The sound of chains unfastening and engines cutting off filled the air before fading into stillness. When the workers left, Elena was alone with it. For the first time, she dared to step inside. The heavy door moaned open, the sound low and hollow, like an old creature waking from a long sleep. The air that drifted out was thick with the scent of metal and mildew. Dust floated in thin rays of sunlight that broke through the cracks in the roof, dancing in slow spirals like ash suspended in time. Her boots echoed on the wooden floor. Each step stirred a faint creak, as though the car remembered the weight of travelers who once filled it with life and laughter. Torn upholstery lined the walls, and faded wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. She brushed her hand over a seat, feeling the roughness of time beneath her fingertips. There was something haunting about it all, something that drew her deeper. A bird's nest rested in the corner near a broken window, feathers and straw tangled together. She could almost hear whispers in the stillness, like faint echoes of voices long gone. The feeling wasn't fear, it was reverence. In that silence, she felt something she hadn't in years: possibility. Elena stood in the center of the car, looking around like a painter studying a blank canvas. Her imagination began to fill the void, visions of what could be. A studio, a gallery, a new beginning. The idea almost made her laugh. What kind of gallery could rise from rust? But then again, what kind of woman bought a train car for $200? The kind who refused to give up, no matter how foolish it seemed. As evening fell, the sky turned the color of old copper, and shadows crawled across the car's surface. She sat on the steps, watching the light shift. Somewhere, a dog barked in the distance. The hum of crickets began, weaving a quiet soundtrack around her thoughts. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel trapped by her circumstances. The weight of debt, the loneliness of single motherhood, they were still there, but muted. In their place was curiosity, fragile but alive. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the worn key the auctioneer had given her. It was old-fashioned, with a small engraving at the base, a symbol she didn't recognize. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the cool metal against her skin. "Maybe you've still got secrets," she murmured, glancing toward the dark interior of the car. The wind rustled through the nearby trees, answering with a whisper of its own. Inside, the light dimmed, and the air grew colder. Dust shifted from the rafters, as if stirred by unseen movement. For a fleeting second, she thought she heard something, a faint metallic clink from deeper within. She froze, heart pounding, listening, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She told herself it was nothing, just the old frame settling. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the car was aware of her presence, like it had been waiting all these years for someone brave or desperate enough to open its doors again. As the last of daylight slipped away, Elena locked the door and stood outside, staring at the silhouette of her strange purchase. It looked different now, less like junk, more like something watching her back. The laughter of the auction crowd drifted in her memory, but it no longer stung, because deep down beneath the rust and ruin, something told her that this was no accident. She didn't just buy a train car. She had awakened a story, and though she couldn't yet see its shape, she felt its pulse beating faintly beneath her fingertips. As the first stars pierced the twilight, Elena turned toward her house, unaware that by morning, whispers about her strange purchase would already be circling through town. The clang of that auctioneer's hammer was still echoing somewhere in the distance, fading, yet forever marking the moment everything changed. And in that fading sound, the world's forgotten fortune took its first breath. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The morning after the auction felt heavier than usual. The air was thick with fog, curling around the edges of the rusty train car like ghostly fingers. Dew clung to its corroded metal, glimmering faintly under the pale dawn light. Elena stood on her porch, a steaming mug of instant coffee in her hands, staring at the hulking shape in her backyard. It looked even older in daylight, more broken, more forgotten. And yet she couldn't look away. The neighbors had already begun their whispers. Curtains twitched, voices carried faintly over fences. "She's lost it." Someone muttered, "First her job, now this." Another replied. Elena pretended not to hear. She had lived too long under the scrutiny of small town gossip to let it cut deep anymore. Still, every word sank into her chest like tiny stones. She walked across the yard, her boots crunching over frost-hardened grass. The closer she got, the more details emerged. The intricate carvings beneath the rust, the faint outline of a crest near the door. The hinges crafted with precision no ordinary freight car would have. She traced her fingers over the emblem, now almost erased by time. The shape was familiar somehow, but distant, like a memory she couldn't quite name. She unlocked the door and stepped inside again. Morning light spilled through the cracks, illuminating the space in a golden haze. Dust shimmered in the air like fragments of the past suspended mid-breath. She took a deep breath and began clearing debris, pushing aside fallen planks, old newspapers, and bird nests. Every sound, the scrape of wood, the clatter of forgotten relics, seemed louder in the stillness. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting sunlight. As she worked, her mind wandered, to rent overdue, to her daughter's war, Naut's shoes, to the quiet ache of loneliness that followed her even into sleep. But each piece of trash she removed, each patch of floor she revealed, felt like reclaiming something, not just from the car, but from herself. Under a layer of dust, she found fragments of velvet, once deep burgundy, now faded to the color of dried blood. The seats had been hand-stitched, the paneling beneath them carved from real oak. It wasn't just an old train. It had been built with care, perhaps even luxury. Someone important had traveled here once. Someone who could afford beauty in motion. Elena sat for a moment, the hammer resting on her lap, staring at the ghost of refinement buried beneath decay. She thought of how easily beauty disappears when no one's left to see it. Maybe that's what drew her to the car, the silent reflection of her own life. By late afternoon she was covered in dirt and sweat, her back aching. The sky outside had turned grey, the wind carrying the scent of rain. She stood in the doorway, watching the light dim, when something glinted at the far end of the car. A tiny flash of gold beneath the layers of rust. She frowned, setting the hammer aside, and knelt closer. There, near the base of the wall, beneath peeling paint, a small metallic line shimmered faintly. She scraped at it with her fingernail, and a patch of gold leaf revealed itself, delicate, ornate, hidden beneath years of corrosion. Her pulse quickened. Someone had once gilded this metal. This wasn't a cargo train. It was something else entirely. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of coming rain. Elena grabbed a lantern from her porch and returned to the car. Inside, the light flickered across the walls, throwing long shadows that danced like restless spirits. She began tracing the edges of the gold line, scraping away rust and paint, revealing a pattern, curved lines, symmetrical swirls, like the border of a crest or emblem. And then she saw it, a faint inscription, almost erased by time. The letters were in another language, French, maybe German, but what caught her eye was the date etched faintly below, 1942. She stepped back, breath caught in her throat. The year hung in the air like a ghost. 1942, the middle of a world at war. The wind howled through the open door, slamming it shut with a metallic thud that echoed through the hollow space. Elena flinched, lantern trembling in her grip. The flame flickered wildly, casting fleeting shapes across the walls. Faces that weren't there, shadows that felt almost human. She whispered to herself, half in fear, half in awe, "What are you?" The storm broke. Rain hammered the metal roof, filling the car with sound. An angry, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from all directions at once. She stayed inside, staring at the carved date, the gold, the mystery pulsing in her chest. For the first time since buying it, the car no longer looked like junk. It looked like history. When the rain eased, she stepped outside. Water streamed down the metal sides, washing away streaks of grime, revealing faint traces of color, deep green and gold beneath the brown rust. Her heart raced as she realized how much was hidden just beneath the surface. She tilted her head, hearing something over the dripping water. It was faint, almost inaudible, but there, a hollow echo from within the car, like air passing through a gap. She moved closer, pressing her ear to the panel. The sound came again, a soft vibration, a hollow space. Her eyes narrowed. She tapped the wall, once, twice, and the dull thud shifted to a faint, empty echo. Something was behind there. Her fingers trembled as she pressed along the seams of the panel, finding one that felt looser than the rest. She grabbed a screwdriver from her toolbox and wedged it in, prying gently. The edge cracked, splinters of wood falling to the floor. A smell of old air escaped, dry, stale, untouched. She stopped, heart pounding. She could see a small opening, just wide enough to catch a glimpse of darkness beyond. She leaned closer, the lantern's glow spilling through the crack. Something metallic shimmered faintly inside. Elena froze. The rational part of her screamed to stop, to wait until daylight. But curiosity burned too bright. She widened the gap just enough to reach in. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and cold, cylindrical. She gripped it carefully and pulled. It was a small brass tube, sealed with a waxed cap at both ends. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The tube was heavier than it looked. She sat on the floor, rain still dripping from the ceiling, and slowly pried off one end. Inside, she found rolled parchment, old, brittle, edges yellowed with time. She unrolled it gently, squinting at the faded ink. It was a list, names, numbers, and symbols written in precise handwriting. Some of the names had lines drawn through them. At the bottom was a word written in bold script, Propriet Privy W. Adler. Elena didn't know what it meant, but the chill that ran down her spine told her it was important. She looked back at the hollow panel, her mind spinning. What else was hidden in there? Who had owned this car? And what had they been trying to keep from the world? The rain began to fade, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the roof. She set the parchment aside and exhaled, trembling. Her instincts told her this was only the beginning, that the train car held secrets far greater than she could imagine. She stood, glancing around at the shadowed interior. The silence felt heavier now, not empty but watchful. Every creak, every drip, every echo felt alive. Outside, the last light of day bled into dusk. The storm clouds parted just enough for a single beam of sun to break through, striking the car's golden edge. It glimmered faintly, one heartbeat of beauty in a world of rust. Elena stood in the doorway, rainwater dripping from her hair, her breath shallow. The whisper of purpose that had drawn her here had now turned into a pulse she could feel beneath her skin. She didn't understand why, but she knew this find was going to change everything. The rusted car behind her hummed softly in the cooling air. its secrets stirring beneath layers of metal and time. And as the darkness swallowed the horizon, Elena Martin, once a woman of lost dreams, had just stepped into the shadow of history itself. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The storm had passed by morning, but its memory lingered in puddles that mirrored the bruised gray sky. Elena stood at her window, staring at the shape of the train car sitting silently at the edge of her property. The night's rain had washed away layers of dust, exposing faint hints of color beneath the rust, green, gold, and something almost regal beneath the grime. The sight stirred a strange mixture of pride and unease. To anyone else, it still looked like junk, but to Elena, it was beginning to feel like a question she couldn't stop asking. Steam rose from her coffee cup as she stepped outside, the ground soft beneath her boots. The early air bit against her skin, sharp with the scent of wet earth and metal. The world was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after chaos, and in that silence, the car loomed larger than ever, like some ancient monument to forgotten grandeur. She walked around it slowly, tracing her hand along the corroded panels. Each groove, each blister of rust, told a story she couldn't read yet. Beneath one window, a layer of paint had peeled away overnight, revealing delicate brush strokes of design, a floral motif etched into the metal. It was beautiful, even beneath decay. A wave of nostalgia passed through her, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the craftsmanship, or maybe it was because she saw herself in it, once vibrant, now weathered by time and circumstance. Her daughter Lily came out onto the porch, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mom, you're staring at that thing again." Elena smiled faintly. "It's not just a thing, sweetheart. It's a train car," Lily said flatly, squinting toward it. "It's kinda creepy." Elena laughed softly. "Maybe a little, but it's ours." Lily wrapped her cardigan tighter and looked out across the field. "What are you gonna do with it?" Elena didn't have an answer. "I'm still figuring that out." When Lily went back inside, Elena lingered. She felt the question gnawing at her. What could she do with it? Scrap it for metal? Try to sell it whole? She doubted anyone would pay much. But when her eyes drifted to the faint golden line she'd uncovered last night, a whisper of intuition told her to wait. Something about this relic didn't want to be sold. It wanted to be understood. Later that afternoon, the sun broke through for the first time in days. Its light spilled across the car's surface, and for a fleeting moment, it didn't look broken at all. The colors beneath the rust seemed to come alive, soft glimmers of what once was. She took a photo on her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, then sent it to an old friend who worked at a salvage yard. "You think this thing's worth anything?" she texted. He replied minutes later, "Depends, that looks custom. Made, passenger car, private luxury maybe, could be early 1900s. Hard to tell without a closer look. Luxury," the word lingered. That evening, Elena gathered her tools again and went back inside the car. The air was damp but calmer now. She'd brought a small radio, letting soft music fill the hollow space and attempt to make it less lonely. Each note seemed to echo against the old walls like the ghosts of travelers humming along. She started scraping paint off the side panels, careful not to damage what lay beneath. It was slow, delicate work. The more she uncovered, the more details emerged: intricate molding, the remains of gold trim, even faint traces of what had once been velvet drapery clinging to the corners of the windows. This wasn't just transportation, she whispered to herself. This was luxury. As twilight deepened, she lit a lantern and kept working. The flickering flame cast long shadows across the car's interior, making the space feel alive, as if the walls themselves were remembering. She found a small brass plate near the door, nearly fused with rust. She rubbed at it with steel wool until letters began to appear, Compagnie Internationale des Wagons, Litz Paris. She blinked. The words meant nothing to her at first. She took a picture and searched them online later that night, sitting cross-legged on her bed while Lily did homework at the table. The results made her breath catch. It was a European luxury train company, the very one that had operated the Orient Express. She stared at the screen, heart racing. Could her car be one of theirs? It seemed impossible, absurd even. Yet the craftsmanship, the detailing, the French inscription, everything fit. Her eyes drifted to the photos online of restored carriages, gleaming in polished wood and gold. They were beautiful, priceless relics of another time. And here she was, sitting on the edge of her worn mattress, realizing she might have one sitting in her backyard. But how had it ended up here, halfway across the world, forgotten in a countryside auction? She looked toward the window. The train car sat in darkness now, barely visible beneath the moonlight. It seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with imagery, flickers of candlelight through velvet curtains, glasses clinking, voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. The rhythm of train wheels echoed faintly through her sleep, distant but steady, carrying whispers from another life. Morning came cold and bright. The car glistened under a veil of frost. Elena packed her daughter's lunch and walked her to the school bus stop. As the bus pulled away, she turned back toward the car, determination settling into her bones. If this relic had a story, she was going to find it. She spent the next few hours cleaning the interior more carefully, documenting everything she found: the carvings, the fabrics, even the brass fixtures. In one corner, beneath a loose seat cushion, she found an old leather tag stamped with numbers, No. 406B. She took a photo and added it to her growing folder of evidence. The more she found, the more questions surfaced. Why had no one recognized this car's significance? Why had it been left to rot in a forgotten field? By late afternoon, a few curious neighbors wandered over. Still playing with your toy? One man joked, leaning on the fence. Elena smiled thinly. Some toys are older than they look. Mrs. Lang was with him, her curiosity barely hiding behind politeness. You really think you can make something of that wreck? Elena looked at the car, sunlight glinting off the small section of gold she'd uncovered. I think it already was something. I'm just trying to remember what. They exchanged looks, then drifted away, muttering. But their doubt didn't touch her this time. Because beneath the laughter, beneath the whispers, Elena felt something stirring, a sense that she was standing at the threshold of something extraordinary. When evening came, she climbed inside once more, running her fingers across the brass plate near the door. Compagnie Internationale des Wagons, Litz, she murmured aloud, savoring the sound. The words carried history, luxury, and mystery all at once. In the distance, a train horn echoed faintly from the main line, long, low, haunting. The sound rolled across the fields, and for a moment, Elena felt time blur. She could almost see it, the polished carriages gliding through the dark, the hum of voices and laughter, the glimmer of crystal and silver under dim lamplight. And then, as the sound faded, she realized something else. The walls of her own car seemed to hum faintly in response, as if remembering the call of their kind. Elena stepped outside, the chill wind brushing her face. The sky above was deep violet, scattered with the first stars. Behind her, the rusted relic glowed faintly under the porch light, a wounded, beautiful thing refusing to be forgotten. She crossed her arms, gazing at it with quiet wonder. She didn't know it yet, but her discovery that night, that nameplate, that crest would soon reach far beyond this quiet town. Someone, somewhere, would recognize it, and once they did, everything would change. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. By the next evening, The whispers had spread across town like wildfire. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even in the narrow aisles of the thrift shop, everyone had something to say about the woman who bought a ghost train. Elena heard them all, though no one spoke to her directly. Their curiosity felt like smoke. It drifted, it clung, but it never quite cleared. She tried to ignore it. She kept her focus on the relic in her yard, that strange, rusted survivor that seemed to breathe when the wind passed through it. Every hour she spent with it peeled away a little more of her fear, replacing it with something she hadn't felt in years, fascination. That night, after dinner, she bundled herself in her father's old coat and stepped outside with a flashlight. The air was crisp, laced with the earthy scent of rain, soaked soil. The train car glowed faintly in the porch light, its windows like dark eyes staring back at her. Inside, the space was cold and still. Her footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor. She ran her hand along the edge of the brass plate she'd uncovered. The words Compagnie Internationale des Wagons, Litz Paris, catching the beam of her flashlight. She whispered them again, almost reverently, as though reciting a spell. At the far end, where she'd found the golden detailing, the light caught something new, a small engraving she hadn't noticed before. She crouched down, brushing aside the dirt. It was another number, smaller, almost hidden beneath the frame. CV, no, 77, private use. Private use. She frowned, her mind spinning. This hadn't been part of a public train. It had belonged to someone. Someone wealthy enough to have their own carriage. Her curiosity surged. She grabbed her phone, snapping photos from every angle. The smell of aged metal and oil hung heavy in the air. She'd grown used to it now, the scent of something that had waited too long to be touched. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the siding. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. In that small pool of light, she could almost see it, not the ruin before her, but the grandeur it once held. Velvet curtains, crystal lamps, people dressed in fine coats, laughing softly as the countryside blurred past. The thought gave her chills. Hours passed without her realizing. She was still tracing the emblem when a low hum reached her ears. Not from outside, from beneath her feet. It was faint, rhythmic, like a vibration deep in the floorboards. She froze. The light quivered in her hand. It lasted only a second before fading, but it left her heart pounding. She crouched and pressed her palm to the floor, cold, solid, but she knew what she'd heard. The memory of that hollow echo from the night before crept back, that empty sound beneath the boards. Slowly, she set the flashlight down and began feeling along the seams of the floor. Her fingers brushed over nails, wood splinters, and then a small gap. The wood was uneven there, a plank slightly looser than the rest. She grabbed a screwdriver from her bag and pried it open. The plank creaked, then lifted, revealing a narrow cavity below. Dust swirled up in a slow spiral. She coughed, squinting into the gap. The beam of her flashlight caught on something metallic inside, dull, square, shaped, wrapped in fabric. She hesitated. For a moment, fear whispered through her, what if it was nothing? What if it was something she didn't want to find? But curiosity drowned out hesitation. She reached in carefully, her fingers brushing against cold metal. The object was heavy, maybe the size of a book. She pulled it free and set it on the floor. It was a ledger bound in cracked leather, its edges eaten by time. The clasp that once sealed it was broken, but still clung weakly to the cover. She ran her thumb over it, brushing away dust until faint embossed letters appeared. Inventaire. The word struck her French again. She opened it slowly, and the pages whispered against one another, brittle but intact. Inside were handwritten lists, dates, names, codes, some in ink, some in pencil, all in a hand too elegant to be ordinary. Each line carried a symbol beside it, a small crest, almost like the one on the train's door, and beside that crest, numbers, prices, notes in the margins. Elena stared at the pages, her heart thundering. This wasn't just a passenger list. It was inventory, but of what? She turned more pages. The handwriting changed halfway through, rougher, more hurried. Some entries were marked with red ink, Verkauft. Her pulse quickened. That was German. She didn't speak it, but she knew enough to recognize the word. Sold. Her throat went dry. What was this? A storm of thoughts swirled in her mind, colliding too fast to process. This wasn't a forgotten relic from some rich man's private travels. It was a record, a transaction, a history someone had tried to bury. The silence around her thickened. Every sound in the old car seemed louder, the creak of the wood, the whisper of the wind through cracks. She closed the ledger and held it against her chest, staring at the shadows around her. Who had owned this train car, and what had it carried? Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, lighting up the sky in brief white bursts. The thunder rolled seconds later, low and distant, as if echoing her thoughts. She stood up slowly, her fingers trembling, and carried the ledger outside. The rain had begun again, gentle but steady, pattering against the roof of her porch. She placed the book on her kitchen table under the warm light, opening it carefully to dry the damp edges. The pages looked older now, fragile, sacred almost. She leaned closer, scanning the entries again. One name caught her eye, Weber J., written beside a date, November 1944. She wrote it down in a notebook. There were others too: Keller, Rosenthal, Adler, each name followed by symbols and numbers. Some had been crossed out. Elena sat back, the weight of realization settling in her chest. This ledger didn't belong to a collector of wealth, it belonged to someone documenting something stolen, traded, hidden. Her gaze drifted to the rain-streaked window, where the outline of the train car blurred against the dark. A strange unease curled inside her. What she'd uncovered wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. She reached for her phone, scrolling through the photos she'd taken earlier, the golden crest, the inscription, the ledger. She thought of calling someone, maybe the salvage friend, maybe even the local museum. But something in her gut told her to wait. Not yet. She didn't understand what she had in her hands, not fully, and until she did, she wouldn't let it out of her sight. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the whisper of rain. She turned back to the open book, her eyes tracing the old handwriting once more. The ink had faded, but the weight of history hadn't. Each word seemed to hum faintly, like a heartbeat beneath the page. She ran her fingertips along the margin and whispered softly, "What happened to you?" Outside, a gust of wind rattled the loose siding of the car, making it groan like something alive. Elena looked up sharply, her pulse skipping. The sound came again, a slow, dragging creak, then silence. She exhaled shakily, forcing a laugh. Old metal, she told herself, just the wind, but deep down she knew better. This wasn't just rust and ruin anymore. The train car was beginning to speak, and she was the first to listen in decades. She turned the last page of the ledger, and there in bold, black letters were 3 words written across the final line: Nicht öffnen, Verflucht. She didn't need to know German to feel the warning pulse through her skin. Do not open, cursed. The rain intensified outside, washing against the windows like restless hands. Elena closed the book slowly, the air around her suddenly colder, heavier. She placed the ledger gently back on the table and stared at it, her breath shallow. Whatever this was, it wasn't just history. It was a secret the world had chosen to forget, and somehow it had found her. She rose, drawing the curtains shut, the room falling into half darkness. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass-tired eyes, a trembling hand, and behind her, through the thin curtain, the faintest outline of the train car in the rain. It waited, silent, watching, and as thunder rolled once more across the sky, Elena Martin knew one truth with bone, deep certainty. She hadn't bought a piece of metal. She had bought a doorway. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the air still clung to everything thick, heavy, and full of the scent of wet iron. The train car gleamed faintly beneath the overcast sky, streaks of water tracing lines down its rusted frame like veins of time itself. Elena stood on the porch again, coffee in hand, staring at it with eyes that no longer saw junk. She saw a vault, a secret sealed by years, perhaps even by guilt. Sleep had eluded her. The ledger lay open on the kitchen table, its pages haunting her through the night. The warning "Nicht öffnen," verflucht, echoed in her mind, its meaning obvious enough even to someone who didn't speak German. Do not open, cursed, but warnings were for the afraid, and fear had already lived with her too long. Curiosity was a stronger hunger now. She stepped down into the yard, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Each footfall carried the weight of what she discovered: the ledger, the names, the markings. They had changed everything. This was no longer an abandoned relic. It was evidence, a chapter torn from the dark heart of history itself. Inside the car, the air was cold and still, carrying the faint aroma of rust and old paper. She paused at the doorway, her fingers brushing the edge of the brass plate "Compagnie Internationale des Wagons, Litz Paris." The inscription no longer felt decorative. It felt like a key to something far larger. The floorboards creaked softly under her weight as she crossed to the far end of the car. The loose plank she had pried open still gaped slightly, a wound in the wood. Beneath it, the cavity yawned dark and quiet, its edges rimed with dust. She crouched beside it again, her lantern casting amber light across the surface. The ledger had been inside there, the first whisper of what the car had once hidden. But her instincts told her it wasn't alone. No one built a compartment like that for a single book. She tapped gently along the wall beside it. The first knock returned a dull thud. The second, near the corner, came back hollow. Her pulse quickened. She traced the seam with her fingertips, feeling where the panel dipped inward. There a faint gap, almost invisible to the eye, but unmistakably intentional. She grabbed her screwdriver again and wedged it into the seam. The wood resisted at first, creaking, groaning, as though reluctant to surrender its secrets. Then, with a sharp pop, the edge gave way. A puff of stale air escaped, dry and cold, like a breath exhaled after decades of silence. Elena lifted the panel slowly. Her light spilled into the hidden space and caught on shapes, dozens of them, rolled cylinders stacked carefully, bound with faded twine, their surfaces coated in dust but still intact. Some were wrapped in what looked like waxed cloth, others bare parchment or canvas. She couldn't tell. Her breath caught. Oh my God. She reached in with trembling hands, lifting one gently into the light. It was heavier than she expected. The edges were frayed, but the material beneath her fingers was unmistakable canvas. She loosened the twine carefully and began to unroll it. As the first inches unfurled, her eyes widened. Beneath the layers of dust and decay lay color muted, aged but alive. A soft swirl of ochre and blue, brushstrokes so deliberate they seemed to breathe. The paint had cracked with time, but the artistry was unmistakable. She leaned closer, heart hammering. It wasn't a print, it wasn't decoration, it was a painting. The light from the lantern caught the faint shimmer of oil, the strokes deep and confident. Even after all this time, the pigment still carried warmth. It was beautiful, hauntingly so. Elena sat back, clutching the edges of the canvas, afraid it might crumble if she breathed too hard. Who painted this? How long had it been hidden? She rolled it back up carefully, reverently, and reached for another. Then another. Each one revealed fragments of worlds she couldn't name, landscapes, portraits, scenes half familiar but somehow foreign. None were signed, but the precision, the tone, the texture, they spoke of mastery. Her fingers shook as she unrolled the fourth. This one stopped her completely. A woman's face emerged from the dust-pale skin, auburn hair coiled beneath a veil, eyes that looked alive even through the years. The light in those eyes was human, intimate, eternal. The brushwork was impossibly delicate. Elena's breath hitched. She'd seen art like this once in a museum years ago, before life had become about bills and survival. She couldn't recall the artist's name, but she remembered the feeling, the ache of beauty so deep it almost hurt. This was that same ache. Her mind raced. Paintings this old, this skilled, they couldn't be worthless. And yet, no record, no signature, no hint of provenance. Only the ledger. She looked toward the open book resting on the bench. The names, the codes, the word verkauft, sold. Could these have been the items listed there? Were these the lost possessions of those names, Weber, Adler, Rosenthal, people who had been erased by war and time? The thought made her stomach twist. She wrapped the paintings back carefully, her movements slow and deliberate. Each roll felt heavier now, not from weight but from meaning. These weren't just artifacts, they were voices. She stacked them on the bench, 20 at least, maybe more hidden deeper in the compartment. The air felt different now, charged, reverent, heavy with memory. As she sat in the dim light, surrounded by relics of art and pain, a strange quiet filled her chest. It wasn't peace, it was awe, the kind that humbles you. Outside, a low train horn echoed across the distance, its sound rolling over the fields like a lament. The irony wasn't lost on her. When she finally stood, her knees ached, her hands trembling from the hours of work. She wiped a streak of dust from her face and stared at the hidden cache of paintings. "Someone hid you here," she whispered softly. "Someone wanted you to survive." The car creaked in reply, wood settling, or maybe something else. She felt it again, that presence, that faint awareness that had followed her since she first stepped inside. It didn't feel sinister now. It felt like watching, waiting. She covered the compartment again, tucking the panel back loosely. Her lantern's flame flickered, casting long shadows that stretched across the seats like reaching hands. She packed her tools, still unable to tear her gaze away. When she stepped outside, the air was colder. The sky was clearing, the first hints of stars breaking through the veil of cloud. She looked back at the car, its outline sharp against the dim light of her porch. She knew what she had to do next. She needed help, someone who could tell her what these paintings really were. Someone who could confirm what her heart already suspected. As she turned toward the house, the reflection of the lantern glimmered faintly across the car's window, catching her own reflection, small, tired, but lit with something new. Not fear, not doubt, wonder, the kind that only appears when the impossible starts to look real. And behind that wonder, a whisper rose from somewhere deep inside her, a voice that felt older than memory. "You were meant to find this." Elena paused at her door, her hand on the knob, her eyes drawn back once more to the silent relic standing in the dark. The night air hummed faintly, carrying the scent of rain and rust. Somewhere inside that car, color slept beneath shadow, beauty hidden beneath ruin. And for the first time, Elena understood the strange pull she'd felt from the moment she saw it. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a calling. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Elena barely slept that night. The images of the hidden paintings looped behind her eyelids, flashes of color and shadow that refused to fade. Even in the quiet of her small kitchen, the house felt different now, as though the air itself had learned a secret too big to hold. The ledger sat open on the table once more, the pages rippling slightly beneath the gentle hum of the ceiling fan. She traced her finger along the names again: Weber, Adler, Rosenthal, names that once belonged to flesh and blood, now trapped in ink and silence. Every entry felt heavier now. Every mark in that book had a soul behind it. She stared out the window toward the dark shape of the train car, its faint reflection mirrored in the dew on the grass. Something inside it called to her, not greed, not even curiosity anymore, but a strange sense of duty. These weren't hers. They were history's orphans. By mid-morning, she made up her mind. She needed an expert, someone who could tell her what she had found before the weight of it crushed her imagination. Elena dialed the number of the nearest antique appraiser in the county, a man named Walter Briggs, whose faded radio commercials still played between local farm reports. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but polite. "Briggs Antiques," he said. "Hi." Elena began cautiously. "I found something I think might be valuable. It's old, maybe from Europe. Paintings." That word paintings felt heavy as it left her lips. Briggs was quiet for a beat. "Paintings, huh? You local?" "Yes, just outside town. It's kind of a long story. I bought an old train car at an estate auction." There was a pause on the line, then a small laugh. "A train car? Now you've got my attention." By afternoon, his truck pulled up near her yard, the engine sputtering before dying with a wheeze. He climbed out, a short man with gray hair and a notebook tucked beneath his arm. His boots sank slightly into the muddy grass as he approached, eyeing the car with open curiosity. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "They weren't kidding. You really bought a train car?" Elena smiled nervously. $200, he let out a dry laugh. "Guess we'll see if that's a bargain or a mistake." Inside, the air was cool and dim. Dust motes drifted lazily through the light. Briggs stepped carefully, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. His eyes scanned every corner, his expression sharpening the deeper he looked. "You weren't kidding," he said finally, crouching beside the hidden compartment she'd revealed. "These panels, this craftsmanship, this thing's not American. Late 1930s, maybe early 40s. European make, without a doubt." Elena nodded. "I found something inside." She unwrapped one of the canvases, her hands steady now but her heart still wild. The painting caught the light, muted greens and browns, the soft curve of a woman's shoulder, brushwork that moved like breath. Briggs froze. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "That's not amateur work." He leaned closer, his magnifying lens glinting as he examined the edge of the canvas. "The pigment, the texture. This is old, mid-20th century, easily, maybe older." He turned to her, his face unreadable. "Where did you say this came from?" She hesitated. "It was hidden, inside the wall." He exhaled through his nose, scratching his chin. "You've got something important here, Miss Martin. This isn't just art, this is history." Elena's stomach tightened. What kind of history? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket, snapping several photos. "I'll send these to a colleague of mine in Chicago. She's an art restorer, knows her European painters better than anyone around here." He looked around again, taking in the details of the car, the gilded trim, the fading crest, the aged panels. "Whatever this is, it wasn't meant to be found, and yet it survived. That makes it valuable, very valuable." His words hung in the air like static. After he left, Elena sat alone inside the car once more. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting alive, thick with the residue of discovery. She could almost feel the past breathing beneath the walls, whispering fragments of forgotten languages. The next day, Briggs called back. His tone was different, quieter, measured. "Elena, my contact confirmed what I suspected. One of those paintings, the portrait of the woman with auburn hair, It bears resemblance to a lost piece attributed to a European master, the signatures missing, but the brushworks nearly identical. Elena's breath caught. A lost piece, lost since the 1940s, he said, taken from a private collection during the war, never recovered. She sank into a chair, the phone cold against her ear. You mean stolen, I mean displaced, he replied carefully. Art like that went missing by the thousands back then. Some were destroyed, others resurfaced in strange places. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the train car stood bathed in late afternoon light. You think that's what this is? I think you found something big, Elena, he said softly, and something that's not going to stay quiet for long. After the call ended, she sat in silence for a long time, the ticking of the clock filling the space between her thoughts. She looked down at her hands stained with dust and oil, trembling slightly. She wasn't sure if what she felt was excitement or fear. That night, she returned to the car again, unable to stay away. The moon hung low, painting the world in silver and shadow. Inside, the lantern light flickered, throwing the outlines of the rolled paintings across the walls like ghosts dancing in silence. She unrolled one of the smaller canvases, her movements tender, reverent. It was a landscape this time, a river winding through misty hills, trees bending under invisible wind. The brushstrokes shimmered faintly in the light, alive with motion even after decades of stillness. She smiled faintly. You've been waiting here all this time. The car creaked softly in response, as though agreeing. The more she stared, the more the thought gnawed at her that someone, somewhere, had once risked everything to hide these. Maybe in the chaos of war, maybe to protect beauty from destruction. Whatever the reason, it had worked. They had survived. She stepped back, her eyes tracing the curve of the painting, the texture of age. The silence pressed in again, but this time it wasn't ominous. It was sacred. Then from outside a sound, distant at first, the low growl of an engine, then headlights sweeping across the field. Elena froze. No one ever came down this road after dark. The engine slowed, then stopped near her gate. A pair of doors opened, then closed softly. Footsteps, two sets, crunching through gravel. Her pulse spiked. She blew out the lantern quickly, plunging the interior into darkness. Only the moonlight remained, spilling faintly through the broken windows. She crouched near the wall, heart hammering in her chest. Through a slit in the door, she saw movement, silhouettes, two men standing near the car. One of them pointed toward it, the other lit a cigarette, the ember glowing briefly in the dark. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw the way they looked at it, not with curiosity, but with purpose. The cigarette flared again, then dropped, crushed under a heel. The men lingered a few moments longer before turning back toward their car. The engine started, then rolled slowly down the road until the night swallowed it whole. Elena waited several minutes before daring to move. When she finally exhaled, her hands were trembling. Someone knew. Whether it was the appraiser's contact, a rumor from the auction, or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. But she was no longer alone in this discovery. She stepped outside, the night air sharp in her lungs. The headlights were gone, but their ghost still lingered on the grass, faint tire marks glistening in the moonlight. Elena looked back at the train car, now standing silent, almost regal beneath the stars. For the first time, it felt less like her secret and more like a beacon. Something was coming. And she could feel it in the stillness, in the way the air seemed to hum, in the way the car seemed to pulse with life once more. She brushed her hand along its cold metal side, whispering to herself, "You've been found again, haven't you?" The wind stirred softly, rustling through the nearby trees, carrying a faint echo, a sound almost like a sigh. Elena turned toward her house, lantern in hand, her steps slow and thoughtful. The fear hadn't left her, but it was laced now with wonder. Because beneath everything the rust, The history, the warning, she could feel it. The hum of something alive beneath the surface of time. And as she crossed the yard, the moon slipped behind the clouds, leaving her and her secret wrapped in shadow once more. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The morning broke in muted gold, the kind of light that seemed unsure whether to bring warmth or warning. Elena sat at her kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside the open ledger. Her phone rested near it, silent, screen dark, though she found herself glancing at it every few seconds. She hadn't told anyone about the men who came in the night. Not Briggs, not even her daughter. What could she say? That strangers had appeared outside her house, drawn by a rumor that shouldn't exist yet? Even she didn't know how word had traveled, but deep down she suspected news of beauty never stayed buried long. The ledger lay before her like an open wound, its pages filled with history's quiet thefts. She traced one of the inked names again, whispering it under her breath. Adler. The handwriting was elegant, steady, someone who'd once believed the world made sense. When the phone finally rang, she startled so hard her coffee sloshed. It was Briggs. His voice came through low and urgent. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully. My contact, the restorer, she confirmed something this morning." Elena's heart thudded. "Confirmed what?" "One of those paintings," he said. "The portrait of the veiled woman. It's a match to a lost work by a man named Victor Reinhardt. He was a European master from the 1940s. Vanished during the war. Some of his pieces were never recovered after the Nazi seizures." Her breath caught. "You're saying these are stolen paintings?" Briggs hesitated. "That's one word for it. Another might be hidden. It depends who you ask." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. "How sure is she?" "Sure enough," he replied. "The brushwork, the pigments, even the composition, they're his. These paintings could be worth millions." The word hung in the air like a storm cloud. Millions. But it didn't spark greed, it sparked dread. She stood slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "You told her my name, didn't you?" There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, "She needed context, Elena. Don't worry, she's professional." Elena closed her eyes. But professionalism didn't stop rumors. And in the art world, a whisper could travel faster than any truth. After the call ended, she paced the floor, thoughts circling like vultures. She remembered the car parked at her gate the night before. The way those men had looked at the relic, not curious, but claiming. The ledger's warning flashed again in her mind. "Do not open." Cursed. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped low, washing the fields in amber. The air hummed with distant cicadas, their steady rhythm like a clock counting down. She walked to the train car again, unable to stay away, every step dragging the weight of uncertainty behind it. Inside, dust hung suspended in long beams of light cutting through the broken roof. The paintings still lay where she'd left them, rolled tight, each one a fragile secret waiting to be unbound. She knelt beside them, her fingertips grazing the edges of the nearest canvas. It wasn't just art anymore. It was evidence of beauty stolen, lives erased, and history rewritten in silence. She thought about the man Briggs had mentioned, Victor Reinhardt, a name lost to her but now echoing in her home. Somewhere, perhaps in Europe, people still searched for his work, for closure, for proof that beauty could outlive the cruelty that tried to claim it. Elena sighed, resting her hand on one of the canvases. "Who hid you?" she whispered. "And why here?" The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose door hinge with a slow, rhythmic creak. The sound made her shiver. She sat for a long time, tracing her thoughts backward to the auction, to the ledger, to that first spark of curiosity. Every moment had felt accidental, yet now it seemed deliberate, like she'd been led by invisible hands toward this discovery. Then, from beneath the far bench, a faint glimmer caught her eye. She frowned, crawling closer. Beneath the dust lay something small, metallic, a clasp or lock of some kind. She brushed away the grime, revealing a slender box wedged between the floorboards and the wall. It was barely visible, its surface blackened with age. Her pulse quickened. She pried it loose with the edge of her screwdriver until it came free. It was a narrow case, maybe a foot long, bound with a tarnished latch. The initials V.R. were faintly etched on the lid. Her breath hitched. Victor Reinhardt. She carried it carefully to the light, her fingers trembling as she unlatched it. The lid creaked open with a sigh. Inside, wrapped in faded linen, lay a fountain pen, a small metal key, and a folded piece of parchment yellowed by time. She unwrapped the parchment gently. Ink bled softly across the surface, handwriting in elegant German script. She recognized only a few words: Zug, Versteckt, Retten. She fumbled for her phone and opened a translation app, photographing the text. Slowly, the words appeared in English. The train is to remain hidden. The paintings are to be preserved. They belong not to men of war, but to the world. Her heart pounded. She read it again, her throat tightening. The note was signed, Victor Reinhardt, 1944. Elena stared at the name, her mind spinning. The artist himself had hidden them, not stolen, protected. The air inside the car felt charged now, electric, as though the walls recognized the name too. She looked around, her pulse hammering. The space that had once felt eerie now felt sacred. She ran her hand over the small key in the box. Its teeth were ornate, unlike any she'd seen before. It wasn't for the door. It was for something else, maybe another compartment, another secret. She scanned the car, her eyes catching on the far end near the conductor's section, a small hatch bolted shut. She hadn't noticed it before. The edges were lined with rust, but beneath it, she could see the faint outline of an old lock. The key turned in her fingers, almost inviting. Lightning flickered faintly through the window. The coming storm painted the air in flashes of silver. Elena approached the hatch slowly, every step echoing. Her breath was shallow, heart beating hard against her ribs. She crouched before it, fit the key into the slot it slid in perfectly. For a moment she hesitated, feeling the weight of that warning again. Do not open, but then she turned it. The lock clicked, metal groaned, the hatch fell open, inside darkness, and then a glint. Her lantern light caught on something deep within the compartment, more than paper, more than art. A box, larger, wrapped in waxed cloth, its edges bound with twine. The shape was uneven, rigid, metallic in places. Elena reached toward it, but the first roll of thunder cracked outside, shaking the old walls. She froze, lantern trembling in her hand. For a moment she felt it, a strange shift in the air, almost like a breath drawn in the dark. Something inside the box moved, just slightly. She stumbled back, the lantern's light flickering wildly across the compartment. The car creaked, the wind howled, and for the first time since she'd bought it, Elena felt that something alive still lingered inside, not human, not ghostly, but memory itself, too heavy to stay still. The storm broke fully, rain lashing the windows. The sound swallowed everything, but beneath it, she thought she heard something else, faint, distant, a whisper too soft to name. It could have been wind, or it could have been a voice. And as she stared into that open hatch, the light quivering in her hand, Elena Martin knew one thing for certain. Whatever secret this train had been built to carry, it wasn't done speaking yet. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The storm had howled through the night, leaving behind a sky streaked with ash, colored clouds, and a world that smelled of rain and rust. Elena hadn't slept. Her thoughts spun like restless wheels, circling back to the hidden box, the letter, and the name that had changed everything. Victor Reinhardt. She sat now at the kitchen table, the small parchment unfolded beside her cup of black coffee. Her eyes traced the ink again, every letter soaked in the urgency of a man writing during a war. They belonged not to men of war, but to the world. The words felt alive, a plea whispered through time. Outside, the air was calm again. Birds fluttered in the wet branches, but even their song sounded subdued, cautious. The train car stood quiet in the yard, its surface gleaming faintly with moisture, as if it, too, had been washed clean of denial. By noon, Elena decided to finish what she'd started. The hatch she had opened the night before still lingered in her mind, the shape of the box inside it, the subtle shift she thought she'd seen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe exhaustion had played tricks on her. But part of her knew that what she'd found was not the end of the mystery, it was the threshold. She grabbed her lantern and gloves and stepped back into the relic. The air inside was different today, less decay, more history. The faint scent of old oil and wood polish drifted from the walls, stirred by the morning light. She crouched before the open hatch. The box inside looked older now, its waxed cloth glistening faintly. The twine binding it was stiff but intact. She touched it gently. The fabric felt brittle, its edges hardened by decades of damp air. Taking a deep breath, she slid the box out. It was heavier than she expected. Something inside shifted slightly, a dull sound, metal against metal, or perhaps glass. She placed it on the bench, her hands trembling. Slowly, she began unwrapping it. The cloth flaked apart under her touch, releasing a smell like burned paper and time. Beneath it was a wooden crate, reinforced with rusted brass corners. A wax seal clung to the top, faded almost beyond recognition, a crest, circular, containing a single eagle's wing. She stared at it, heart pounding. It wasn't just any insignia, it looked military. With shaking fingers, she lifted the latch and pried the crate open. The hinges groaned, dust billowing up in a ghostly sigh. Inside lay several objects, carefully wrapped in linen and parchment. She unrolled the first one, a small bronze figurine, its craftsmanship exquisite. A man and woman entwined, frozen mid-embrace, their forms almost impossibly detailed. Beneath it lay another, smaller still, a gold pocket watch, engraved with a family crest. She swallowed hard. These weren't just artifacts, they were personal. One by one, she uncovered them: silver cutlery, fragments of jewelry, a child's ivory hair comb. Each piece whispered of lives that had once existed, now reduced to relics of absence. At the bottom of the box was a small tin cylinder sealed with a corroded cap. She unscrewed it carefully, revealing a scroll of paper wound tight within. It was another list, but this one different. The handwriting was less formal, more hurried. Names again, but beside each, a small notation in German: transportiert, beselt, gelöscht. She stared at it until her eyes blurred. The words she recognized chilled her. Transported, paid, erased. Her hands trembled. She realized what she was holding. This wasn't just Reinhardt's art cache. This was documentation, the ledger's missing half. Evidence of war crimes, hidden under beauty. Her knees gave slightly, and she sat down, the list still clutched in her hand. The silence of the train car pressed in around her, heavy, suffocating. For the first time, the air inside didn't feel sacred, it felt haunted. She whispered into the emptiness, "You didn't just hide paintings, did you, Victor?" The wind outside responded, whistling low through a broken pane. carrying with it a soft, melodic hum, a sound that might have been nothing, or might have been memory trying to speak. That afternoon, Briggs returned. His boots thudded against the porch before she even heard his knock. He looked uneasy, his usual good humor replaced by a furrowed brow. "You've been busy," he said when she opened the door. Elena nodded mutely and motioned for him to follow her out to the car. Inside, she showed him everything: the crate, the objects, the papers. His eyes widened as he knelt to inspect them. "This is—" he began, then stopped himself, searching for words. "Elena, this is something the government should see." Her jaw tightened. "You mean take." "I mean protect," he corrected softly. "If these are what I think they are, stolen cultural property, they could belong to entire nations. This is bigger than any of us." She looked down at the crate, the gold watch glinting faintly in the dim light. "Do you think I don't know that?" Briggs sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Listen, I've seen a lot of strange things come through auctions, forged maps, smuggled antiques, but this is different. You've uncovered something that connects straight back to the war. You could be sitting on a discovery worth $100 million, or evidence that could reopen buried investigations." Elena's voice was quiet but sharp. "And what happens to me then? To my daughter? They take everything, and I get left with nothing but a story no one believes." He looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't find this for money, did you?" "No," she whispered. "I found it because it was meant to be found." Briggs nodded slowly. "Then you need to decide who deserves to know first before someone else decides for you." When he left, the world felt heavier than ever. Clouds gathered again over the fields, and the wind began to pick up, scattering dry leaves across the dirt. Elena stayed inside the car, sitting beside the crate until the last light began to fade. She stared at the paintings, the ledger, the objects laid out before her like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't asked to solve. Every item hummed with stories untold, lives taken, art saved, truth buried. She ran her hand over the ledger again. The ink had bled slightly from the humidity, turning words into blurs of sorrow. "They belong not to men of war, but to the world," she murmured. Outside, thunder grumbled in the distance, but this time it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like an echo, as if the past itself were clearing its throat, ready to be heard. She took one last look at the train car's walls, the fading gold trim catching the light of her lantern. For a brief, flickering moment, she imagined the artist himself standing there, hurriedly hiding the works, praying that someday someone would uncover them with reverence, not greed. The air thickened again, and she could almost feel him there, not a ghost, but a memory pressed into the wood grain and metal, whispering across the decades. Elena whispered back, "I'll tell your story." The wind shifted, the door creaking softly behind her, as if the car itself sighed in relief. Outside, the storm rolled closer, lightning slicing the horizon in silver veins. She gathered the parchment, the letter, the key, and placed them carefully in a box of her own, not to hide them, but to protect them until she could decide who was worthy of the truth. Because what she had found wasn't just treasure. It was testimony, and buried within its beauty lay a promise one she was beginning to understand was now hers to keep. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The first knock came just after midnight. A hollow, measured sound, not loud enough to startle, but sharp enough to still her heartbeat. Elena froze where she sat, a cup of tea cooling untouched beside the lamp. The house had been quiet all evening, the kind of fragile quiet that comes after too much discovery, too much thinking. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows with soft sighs. The storm had passed, but the air still trembled with leftover electricity. Another knock. 3 slow taps this time, not frantic, not polite. Deliberate. Lily was asleep down the hall. Elena set her cup down, her pulse drumming behind her ribs. Visitors were rare at this hour. Out here, miles from town, you didn't just drop by after midnight. You meant to arrive. She rose quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cool floorboards. The old house creaked beneath her as she moved toward the door. For a moment, she simply stood there, her hand hovering above the handle, breath shallow, listening. A man's voice called softly from the other side. Mrs. Martin, her blood turned cold. The voice was calm, practiced too practiced. Who's asking? She called back. There was a pause, then the faint rustle of movement. We're representatives from the National Museum Restoration Division. We received word about your recent discovery. Elena's pulse spiked. No one official should even know yet. Briggs had promised discretion. She tightened her grip on the doorknob but didn't turn it. It's after midnight, she said carefully. You can come back in the morning. We understand this is inconvenient. The man replied smoothly, but the nature of your find requires urgency. There are international interests involved. If we could just have a few minutes of your time. Another voice joined in, younger, lighter, but equally controlled. We mean no harm, Mrs. Martin. We're only here to protect what you've found. Elena glanced toward the window, but the curtain was drawn. Only the faintest outline of movement appeared beyond the frosted glass, two shadows, standing close together. Something about their tone felt wrong, too calm, too prepared. Real officials didn't come at night. They didn't speak in vague phrases and soft voices meant to sound safe. She backed away from the door slowly, heart thundering in her chest. You'll have to contact me through official channels, she said firmly. Good night. Silence, then the faint creak of her front steps, a shift of weight. One of the men spoke again, his voice colder now, stripped of its pretense. We only want the paintings, Mrs. Martin, nothing else. Her throat went dry. Before she could respond, there came a low metallic click, not from the lock, but from outside. A car door opening, then closing. Footsteps, quick and sharp, moving away into the night. Moments later, the sound of an engine starting, then fading down the road until only the wind remained. Elena stood there in the dark, barely breathing. She didn't move until she was certain the sound was gone. Only then did she let her trembling fingers release the door handle. She turned off the lamp, the house falling into thick silence. Her reflection in the window stared back, pale, wide-eyed, the shape of fear barely contained. Somewhere deep down, she had known this would happen. Nothing that valuable, that controversial, stayed hidden without drawing attention. She checked on Lily, who slept peacefully beneath her blanket, the faint rhythm of her breathing anchoring Elena to the moment. For a long time, she just watched her, the innocence of her daughter's face, untouched by the shadows that had now crept into their lives. When she finally returned to the kitchen, the teacup still sat beside the lamp, steam long gone. She picked it up, her hands shaking, and stared at the dark liquid. Her mind replayed every word those men had spoken. We only want the paintings. How could they know? The realization came like a stone dropped into still water. Someone had told them. Her stomach turned. Briggs, no. He'd seemed honest. But his contact, the restorer in Chicago, she had seen the photos. She had the name. She could have passed it along. Elena pressed her palms against her temples, trying to slow the spiral of thought. But the truth was clear. The secret was out. The train car, once her sanctuary, was now a target. She moved quickly. By candlelight, she packed the ledger, the parchments, and Reinhardt's note into a lockbox. The paintings, at least the few she had unrolled, she rewrapped and carried to the cellar, covering them with old tarps and firewood. Every movement was silent, deliberate, born of pure instinct. By the time she was done, the first hint of dawn had begun to grey the horizon. The world outside looked the same, quiet, untouched, but Elena felt something fundamental had shifted. That morning, she told Lily they'd be staying close to home for a few days. She smiled as she said it, hiding the tremor in her voice. "Just want to get some things in order," she lied, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the distant outline of the train car beyond the trees. That evening, Briggs called again. "I've been trying to reach you all day," he said. "Are you all right?" She hesitated. "Someone came by last night." "What do you mean, who?" "They said they were from the National Museum." A pause, then tension hardened his tone. "Elena, that's not possible. I didn't tell anyone where you live, not even my contact. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Silence stretched across the line. "Elena," Briggs said quietly, "you need to be careful. People kill over less than this. Don't show anyone else what you've found. Don't trust anyone who says they're coming to help." Her throat tightened. "What should I do?" "For now, nothing. Stay low. And if they come back, you call me before you open that door." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I will." When the call ended, the room felt colder. She turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. The train car sat motionless under the rising moon, its rusted metal gleaming faintly. But even from here, Elena could swear it looked different now, like something alive holding its breath, aware of being hunted. She pulled the curtain closed, the fabric whispering softly against the glass. Then she sat down at the table, her heart still thudding. She knew this was only the beginning. The discovery had drawn attention, and not all of it came from the kind of people who valued art for what it represented. Some wanted money, some wanted silence, and somewhere in between, she stood one woman holding a secret powerful enough to rewrite history and fragile enough to destroy her life. Outside, a car passed in the distance, its headlights briefly cutting through the trees. Then darkness again, the kind of darkness that listened. Elena whispered to herself, "You shouldn't have knocked." Because now the past wasn't sleeping anymore, it was awake, and it was watching. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The next 2 days passed in an uneasy silence that felt louder than noise. Every sound, the creak of the porch, the whistle of the wind through the gutters, felt like footsteps. Elena found herself checking the locks again and again, glancing through curtains, listening for engines that might not even exist. Lily noticed. Children always did. "Mom," she said over breakfast, "why are you keeping the curtains closed all the time?" Elena forced a smile. "It's just colder with the windows open, honey." "But it's not cold." She didn't answer. She just brushed her daughter's hair, eyes flicking toward the road. The hum of fear had become constant, low, quiet, but always there, like a frequency she couldn't turn off. By mid-afternoon, she finally stepped outside. The world looked unchanged, calm, sunlit, deceptively ordinary. The train car glowed faintly under the winter sun, its metal still damp from last night's dew. She stood in front of it for a long moment, her hand resting on the side. It felt solid, unmoved, but she no longer saw it as hers. This wasn't a project anymore. It was a burden, and every hour that passed, it drew something closer. She walked around to the rear where the open hatch remained half concealed beneath a tarp. Kneeling, she checked the locks again. Everything was untouched. The compartment was still sealed, the crate still inside, the ledger and Reinhardt's letter hidden away. And yet, she felt watched. Somewhere beyond the line of trees, an engine coughed to life, faint, distant, then gone. She straightened, scanning the horizon. Nothing, but the noise lingered, humming in her nerves like static. That night, the phone rang again. Briggs's number. "Thank God," she murmured, answering quickly. "I've been, Mrs. Martin." The voice wasn't his. It was smooth, male, unfamiliar. She froze. "Who is this?" "My name is Agent Danner," the man said calmly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. We were given your contact by a Mr. Briggs. He said you've discovered something that may have national importance." Her grip tightened on the phone. "Where's Mr. Briggs?" "He's fine," the man replied easily. "We've taken over his case files for now. He's cooperating with us. We just need to ask you a few questions about the contents of the train car." Every muscle in her body went rigid. "If you're with the Bureau," she said slowly, "then you already know how to reach me through official channels." A soft chuckle drifted through the line. "Of course. But I thought you'd prefer to handle this quietly." Click. She ended the call. Her heart thundered. The phone screen still glowed in her trembling hand. The number wasn't local. It wasn't even from this state. She turned it off, setting it face down on the table, and stared into the darkness beyond the kitchen window. Her reflection stared back, pale, shaken, determined. The wind shifted outside, carrying the faint scent of pine and something else, cigarette smoke. Her stomach dropped. She moved quietly to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek through. Two figures stood at the edge of her property, near the fence line, not moving, just standing there. Elena's throat tightened. They weren't close enough for her to see their faces, but she saw the faint glow of an ember, one man smoking, the other watching the house. They knew she'd seen them, and they didn't care. She stepped back slowly, heart hammering so hard it ached. For a long moment she did nothing, didn't breathe, didn't think, only listened. The soft crackle of burning tobacco, the whisper of leaves, the faint crunch of footsteps, then silence. When she looked again, they were gone. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room with a flashlight and a kitchen knife on the table beside her. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown to something she couldn't see. By dawn, exhaustion finally dragged her into a light, uneasy sleep on the couch. When she woke, the house was filled with the pale glow of morning. Lily was still asleep. Everything seemed normal again until she stepped outside. Her breath caught. Footprints, fresh, deep, leading up to the train car. Her eyes darted across the yard. Whoever had come hadn't used the road, they'd crossed the back field. The prince stopped at the car door, then turned back the way they came. She ran to the hatch, tearing away the tarp. The lock was scratched. The metal bent slightly as if pried at. But the door still held. She fell to her knees, shaking. They'd tried to get in. She felt sick, her mind racing through possibilities, what they'd wanted, whether they'd come back, whether they'd already found something she'd missed. By noon she called Briggs again, voice trembling. "Someone was here," she whispered. He answered immediately, voice strained. "I know." "What do you mean, you know, Elena? I've been followed too." Her blood went cold. "They came to my shop yesterday," Briggs continued. "Two men in suits, said they were federal, asked about your name, your address, what you'd found. I didn't tell them anything, but they already knew. They had photographs, Elena, of the train car." She sank into a chair, gripping the phone so tightly her fingers hurt. "Then they're not FBI. No," he said quietly, "there's something else, and they want whatever you found." She closed her eyes, her voice cracking. "What do I do?" There was a long pause, then Briggs said, "You need to hide what you can. The paintings, the ledger, everything. Move them somewhere no one will think to look. And Elena, what? Don't go to the police. If those men are who I think they are, the moment this hits official channels, it's out of your hands." Her breath hitched. "Who do you think they are?" "Collectors," he said darkly. "Private, wealthy, connected. The kind of people who buy things that were never meant to be sold." Elena stared at the window again, the world outside suddenly smaller, thinner, as though reality itself had narrowed around her. That evening, as dusk crept in, she returned to the train car one last time before nightfall. The interior felt colder, the air stagnant. She crouched near the hatch, whispering to herself as she checked the locks again. "You're not leaving here," she murmured. "Not until the truth's safe." Her voice trembled, but she meant every word. The lantern light flickered against the walls, casting restless shadows that made the car seem alive. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard something, a faint tapping from inside the compartment, like metal shifting. She froze, breath caught in her throat, but there was only silence. Outside, the sky bled into indigo. The wind picked up, carrying a chill through the open door. She blew out the lantern, locking the train car behind her. As she walked back toward the house, the first stars began to appear, dim, distant, fragile things. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the kitchen window as she stepped inside. Behind her, in the distance, the silhouette of the train car stood against the fading sky, but she didn't see the faint glint of light, the reflection of a pair of binoculars from the tree line. Someone was still watching. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. By dawn, the world outside was still too still. The fog hung low across the fields, swallowing the trees and smothering sound. The light was a dull silver, and the air carried that eerie quiet that makes every creak sound like a whisper. Elena hadn't slept. Not after what she'd seen: the footprints, the headlights, the men who were always there and never there. The fear had settled in her bones now, a constant tremor just beneath her skin. She moved through her house like a shadow, every step deliberate, every sound too loud. Lily was still asleep, thank God. Her daughter's innocence was the only soft thing left in a world that had turned sharp around the edges. Elena poured a cup of coffee, her hand trembling as she lifted it. The newspaper on the counter lay untouched. But something about its front page made her pause. A headline: "Private collectors investigated for possession of not saluted art." She read every word, her heart pounding harder with each line. A European smuggling ring, decades old, resurfacing through an anonymous tip. Paintings, sculptures, artifacts, all tied to the Reich's lost cargo trains. And then, buried near the end of the article, a single sentence: "Authorities are currently investigating reports of similar findings within the United States." She felt the blood drain from her face. They were searching, they knew something, and her train car, her accidental discovery, was part of that same story. The walls of her kitchen seemed to close in. She folded the paper quickly, shoving it into a drawer, as if hiding it could erase what it meant. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. She stared through it toward the dark shape of the train car in her yard. It was just barely visible, an outline in the mist, patient, silent, almost watching her. She couldn't wait anymore. If there were more records, anything that could explain who hid the art, and why she needed to find them before someone else did. By noon, she was back inside the car. The interior was colder than usual, the air thick with the metallic scent of damp rust. Dust clung to every surface. She lit her lantern, the warm light casting long, trembling shadows along the wooden panels. The compartment that had held the paintings was now sealed again, but her instincts told her there was more. Every inch of the train car was a story waiting to be pried open. She began tapping along the floorboards, listening for the hollow echo she remembered from before. Tap, tap, thud. She froze. That sound again, hollow. Beneath the bench on the right side, she dropped to her knees, prying at the edge of the floor with the screwdriver. The board resisted, splintering slightly before lifting just enough for her to see beneath it. Dust poured out, followed by a faint, dry smell, old wood and old secrets. She reached in and felt leather, smooth, worn. With trembling hands, she pulled it free. Another book, smaller than the ledger from before, but thicker. Bound in brown leather, the corners reinforced with tarnished brass. It was heavy not from weight, but from presence. She wiped the cover with her sleeve. No title, no markings, just an embossed crest on the front, the same eagle's wing she'd seen on the sealed crate before. Her heart began to race. She opened it carefully. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to sepia, but the handwriting was clear, meticulous columns of names, locations, and coded symbols. Unlike the first ledger, this one included sketches, outlines of crates, train routes, and strange insignias. Her breath caught as she turned a page and saw it. A detailed sketch of a train, a luxury car, marked with Reinhardt's initials. Beneath it, a single line written in German, Transport 77, München to Calais, December 1944. Her eyes widened. This was her train, the exact same design. She flipped through the next pages, and the story unfolded in fragments. Notes written in the margins described a ghost transport, carrying confiscated art and private belongings, a secret convoy diverted from its route to escape Allied bombing. It had vanished somewhere between France and the Channel coast. She whispered, "This can't be real," but the evidence stared back. The ledger continued with inventory lists, jewelry, portraits, statues followed by numbers scrawled in haste. Some were crossed out, others circled. And then she found it. A list labeled Compartment 7B. Her finger traced down the line, paintings 27 pieces, Ledger 1, Ledger 2, metal cases, then one final entry separate underlined, return manifest, deliver to safe hand J, W, J, W. The initials burned in her mind. Johann Weber, the same name from the first ledger. She turned the page again, more drawings, more coded messages. But one note stood out, written hastily in English this time, almost as if added later. If found, contact the heirs. The truth belongs to them. Elena sat back slowly, the words sinking into her like cold water. The heirs, the families of those who had lost everything. Her discovery wasn't just about art or money. It was about people, descendants scattered across the world, unaware that fragments of their past lay locked inside this rusted shell. The air inside the train car felt heavier now, alive with the weight of the revelation. She ran her hand over the open book, her fingertips trembling. A faint sound broke her focus, a soft crunch of gravel outside. Her head snapped up. Footsteps. She killed the lantern instantly, plunging the interior into darkness. Her breath quickened, heart hammering so loudly she could hear it. The footsteps drew closer, slow, cautious, deliberate. Someone was walking around the car. Elena crouched behind the bench, clutching the ledger to her chest. Through the crack in the door, she saw a faint beam of light sweeping across the ground, a flashlight. Two shadows. They paused near the door. One of them spoke, voice muffled through the metal. "She's been in here again." Elena's stomach twisted. Another voice, lower, colder. "Then she's found more. We take it tonight." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She pressed herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. The door handle rattled, then stopped. Silence. The men moved away, their voices fading into the fog. The sound of a car door opening, closing, then the low growl of an engine pulling away down the dirt road. Only when the sound was gone did Elena move. She exhaled shakily, her body trembling as if the adrenaline itself had weight. Her mind spun. They knew. They were watching every step. She looked down at the ledger in her arms, the book that had survived war, oceans, and time, and realized she was holding proof of something too valuable to remain hers. But for now, she couldn't think about the world, or the families, or justice. Right now, she just had to stay alive long enough to tell the truth. She stood slowly, slipping the ledger into her coat. The air outside was still dense with fog, curling through the trees like ghosts. She locked the car behind her and made her way back toward the house, every step deliberate, her heart still echoing the rhythm of those departing footsteps. And in the distance, where the mist thickened near the tree line, a faint glimmer caught the light, the reflection of a lens. Watching, always watching, as the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The fog didn't lift the next morning. It only thickened, swallowing the horizon and muting the world into shades of gray. Elena stood at her kitchen window, the steam from her coffee barely visible against the cold glass. The shape of the train car blurred into the mist like a memory refusing to fade. The ledger lay open on the table, its pages trembling in the draft that crept under the door. She'd spent half the night reading it, tracing every word, every line, until exhaustion blurred the ink into ghosts. Transport 77, compartment 7B-JW, she said the initials aloud again, Johann Weber. The mysterious historian who had corresponded with the original owners, or perhaps the man who helped hide their stolen treasures. But the ledger was more than record. It was confession, names, places, accounts. The ink carried guilt. She turned another page, and the horror deepened. Notes describing secured transports, coded references to looted families, art stripped from walls before their owners vanished into history. The ledger wasn't just about stolen beauty, it was about stolen lives. Elena pushed the book away, the nausea rising like bile. This wasn't treasure, it was evidence, a record of pain that had never been answered for. The sound of gravel outside made her heart stop, tires crunching softly, steady and slow. She moved to the window, peeking through the thin crack in the curtain. A black sedan idled near the edge of her property. No markings, no lights, just waiting. She ducked back quickly, pulse racing. The fog wrapped the car in half. Visibility, the silhouette of two figures barely discernible through the haze. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were the same men. For nearly 5 minutes, nothing moved. Then the engine hummed again, and the car drifted back onto the road, disappearing into the fog like a nightmare sinking beneath water. Elena exhaled shakily, her body trembling. She could feel herself unraveling, every nerve on fire, but she couldn't stop. The truth she'd uncovered was too heavy to bury again. She needed help, real help. But from whom? The police would confiscate everything. The government would hide it. The collectors would destroy it. Her eyes fell on the name again, J.W. Johann Weber. She remembered the old correspondence she'd found weeks ago, tucked among the crates. A German address, faded but still legible. She crossed to the cabinet where she'd hidden those letters, pulling them out and laying them beside the ledger. The handwriting matched, elegant, looping from another century. One letter in particular stood out. It was dated 1987. The ink was faint, the paper yellowed, but the message was clear enough. The train must never be forgotten. It carried not gold, but souls. If anyone finds it, tell them, the art must go home. The truth must go home. The signature was unmistakable, Johann Weber. Elena's fingers shook as she reread it. He had known. He had written this decades after the war, hoping that someday someone would find it, and she had. She sank into a chair, emotion crashing through her in waves, fear, awe, disbelief, purpose. She wasn't meant to profit from this. She was meant to deliver it. The truth was no longer hers to keep. A sudden knock shattered the silence. She jolted upright, the sound ripping through her nerves. It wasn't at the front door this time. It came from the back near the porch that faced the yard. She froze, listening. Another knock. Harder. Her heart slammed in her chest. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy flashlight, and moved toward the door as quietly as she could. Through the small window pane, she saw the silhouette of a man. Just one, tall, hat pulled low. She hesitated, every muscle tense. Who is it? Walter Briggs? came the muffled reply. Relief and dread hit her at the same time. She unlocked the door, but kept the chain latch fastened. Walter, he looked awful pale, sweating, his clothes damp from fog. His truck idled behind him, barely visible through the mist. Elena, he said urgently, we need to talk. She slid the chain loose and let him in. What happened? He stepped inside, glancing over his shoulder before closing the door. They came to me again. He said, voice hoarse. Different men this time. Said they were private investigators. They knew about the paintings, about Reinhardt, about you. Elena's stomach twisted. How much do they know? Enough, he said grimly. They're not collectors, Elena. They're brokers, middlemen. They move stolen art quietly, no questions asked, no paperwork. If they get those paintings, they'll vanish again. No museums, no history, just silence. She pressed a hand to her forehead. God. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. We have to get that ledger out of here, and the paintings too, somewhere safe, somewhere far away, before nightfall. Elena shook her head. If I move them, they'll know. They already know, he said. They're watching you. They want proof before they move in. Once they have it, it's over. Outside, the fog thickened until it pressed against the windows like breath. The faint hum of a car engine echoed again, too distant to pinpoint but close enough to feel. Briggs turned toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. We don't have much time. He reached for the ledger on the table, but Elena grabbed it first, clutching it against her chest. No, not yet. Elena, you don't understand. Her voice trembled. This book isn't just a record. It's a map. It leads to people, families who lost everything. If I hand it to the wrong person, it disappears forever. Briggs stared at her, torn between fear and understanding. Then what do you plan to do? She looked down at the open page, at the names written in careful ink, the symbols of nations, the routes of trains that never reached their destinations. I'm going to find him, she said softly. Johann Weber, if he's still alive or if his family is, they deserve to know. Briggs frowned. He'd be ancient by now. Then maybe his children, she said. Someone must still carry his name. He left this behind for a reason. Briggs hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, but you can't do this alone, and if they're following you, we can't take the main roads. We'll need to plan carefully. She gave a small, weary smile. Careful stopped working the moment I bought that train car. The sound of a car door slamming outside made them both freeze. Briggs moved to the window, peering through a slit in the curtain. His face drained of color. They're here. Elena's breath caught. How many? 2. He whispered. Maybe 3. The world outside had turned ghostly white. Shadows moved in the fog, slow, deliberate. Briggs turned to her, voice low but urgent. We need to go. Now. Elena hesitated, glancing toward the ledger, the letters, the train car still visible through the haze. If I leave, they'll take everything. He met her eyes. If you stay, they'll take you. She swallowed hard. The truth was a living thing now, fragile, hunted. With shaking hands, she wrapped the ledger in a scarf and slipped it into her bag. The house groaned as footsteps approached the porch. Elena turned off the lights. Through the back, she whispered. They slipped out into the fog, the cold biting against their skin, every movement muffled by the wet ground. The world felt unreal, blurred edges, ghost sounds, a heartbeat of danger in every breath. Behind them, the faint creak of her porch steps, a hand testing the door handle, then silence. Elena clutched the bag tighter to her chest. The ledger's weight pressed into her like a heartbeat, the pulse of history, the whisper of countless lost voices. The fog swallowed them whole as they vanished into the trees, carrying with them a truth the world had buried and others would kill to reclaim. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of gray through a sea of fog. Every few miles, the world reappeared, a gas station sign, a line of bare trees, the pale flicker of early dawn against the windshield. Elena gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white beneath the faint glow of the dashboard. Beside her, Briggs sat silent, scanning the empty road through half-lidded eyes. The smell of coffee from the thermos between them filled the silence, though neither drank it. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the farmhouse behind. Every word felt heavy now, as though the wrong sentence could summon the men who hunted them. Behind them, the world they knew, the small town, the house, the train car that had changed everything, was shrinking into memory. Ahead, the unknown waited like an unopened door. The bag on Elena's lap felt heavier than it should. Inside it, wrapped carefully in cloth, lay the ledger and the letter from Johann Weber. She could feel the edges pressing against her knees, as if reminding her it was still there, the heart of everything. When they finally stopped, it was at a diner just off the interstate, the kind that smelled like old grease and exhaustion. Briggs parked near the back, away from the windows. Inside, the air was warm, humming with the soft clatter of dishes and the low murmur of truck drivers sharing stories no one else would hear. They slid into a booth in the far corner. Elena stirred her coffee, eyes distant. "Do you think he's still alive?" she asked quietly. Briggs exhaled slowly. "Weber, he'd be over 90 now, maybe older, but if he's not, maybe someone in his family is, someone who knows what he was protecting." She nodded faintly, pulling the folded letter from her bag. The edges were frayed, the ink faded to brown, but the words still carried weight. The train must never be forgotten. It carried not gold but souls. Briggs leaned in, reading the lines again. "It's strange," he said. "This isn't written like a smuggler or a thief. It's written like a man confessing. He wasn't hiding it for himself," Elena murmured. "He was hiding it for someone else." Outside, a truck roared past, shaking the window. Both of them jumped. Fear had rewired their senses. Every sound now felt like an omen. Briggs lowered his voice. "You said the ledger mentioned Weber's initials beside the word return. Maybe this was his last act, returning what was stolen." Elena nodded. "Then maybe I can finish what he started." She pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolling through the photo she'd taken of the old address. Frankfurt. He was there in the 80s, according to this letter. Briggs frowned. "That's not exactly a quick trip across town." "I know," she said softly. "But this doesn't end here, Walter. If I hand this over to the wrong people, it disappears. The only way to keep it safe is to take it back to where it began." He studied her for a moment, his expression a mix of admiration and worry. "You're talking about crossing an ocean with a target on your back." Elena looked down at the letter again. "I'm talking about giving a voice to the people who never got one." The conviction in her voice silenced him. For a moment neither spoke. The hum of the diner filled the void between them. Then Briggs sighed and nodded. "All right, but you're not doing it alone." She gave a small, tired smile. "You don't have to. I'm already in it," he said, almost bitterly. "The moment those men showed up at my door, this stopped being your problem alone." Elena didn't argue. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of something close to relief, not safety, but solidarity. They left the diner before sunrise. The sky was still bruised with violet clouds when Briggs turned onto a smaller road, avoiding the main highway. As they drove, Elena stared out at the endless sprawl of grey fields, her reflection faint in the window. She thought of Lily, safe for now, staying with her sister in another state. The goodbye had been short, too calm for the weight it carried. Elena had promised she'd be back soon. Though part of her feared she'd spoken a lie she didn't yet know how to avoid. By afternoon, they reached a small motel near the airport. Briggs carried their bags while Elena double-checked the car locks twice. She felt the paranoia pressing harder now, the weight of unseen eyes. In the room, she spread the ledger across the bed, scanning through the pages again. Something about the entries had been haunting her, the repetition of one particular symbol, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. She'd seen it before, on one of the crates inside the train car, and again, faintly, on the box that had held the artifacts. "What is this?" she murmured. Briggs leaned closer. "Looks like a collector's mark. Some families used symbols instead of names during the war, kept inventory without leaving a paper trail." She traced it gently with her finger. "It's on almost every entry tied to Weber's initials." He nodded slowly.